curiosity stretches out like a blanket, and science tiptoes softly into the quiet hours. This evening's exploration may seem, at first glance, like an unlikely lullaby. It's about something immense, something terrible, and yet something awe-inspiring in its scale and complexity. Tonight we're talking about the nuclear bomb, not with fear, not with alarm, but with wonder and a whisper of caution. Because beneath the destruction lies a story of invisible forces, of tiny particles with enormous potential, and of human beings who learned how to crack open the very heart of the atom. It's a strange kind of fire we've made. Not the warmth of a candle or the flicker of a campfire, but a sun unleashed for seconds, maybe less, right here on Earth. Have you ever looked up at the night sky and wondered what it would be like to hold a star in your hand? What it might take to light it? What happens when it burns too fast? And as you're listening, I wonder, where are you tonight? What does the sky look like above you? Is it full of stars? Or clouds? Or maybe just the soft flicker of a lamp by your bedside? If you find comfort in slow science and gentle curiosity, I'd be so grateful if you'd tap like, maybe subscribe, or share this little corner of calm with someone else who needs it. It helps us keep these stories softly spinning in the night. So now, if you're ready, if your thoughts are slowing and your pillow has found just the right shape, let's begin. Because within the silence of atoms lies the thunder of creation. And somewhere between sparks and shadows, sleep and sunlight, is the story of why a nuclear bomb is so unimaginably powerful. There's something strange about the way we respond to the idea of a nuclear bomb. It doesn't feel quite real, does it? Not in the way a thunderstorm feels real, or a sharp corner of a table, or the slow ache of a memory. A nuclear bomb is different. It lives in a part of the imagination that's both too large and too distant to touch. Sometimes it's a mushroom cloud in a history book, flattened buildings on old black and white film reels. Sometimes it's just a word, nuclear, that makes your breath catch for a moment before you tuck it quietly back onto the shelf labelled too much. But every now and then it surfaces, a headline, a siren test, a story someone tells softly with a kind of disbelief in their voice, and suddenly the air feels thinner, like the very idea of a nuclear blast steals oxygen from the room. But even then, it's abstract. Because here's the thing. The human brain isn't built to grasp extremes. We're great with campfires, teaspoons, 10-minute waits. We're good at counting up to 5, maybe 10. We know what it feels like to stub a toe or burn a finger on hot tea. We know what loss feels like in single doses. But scale is where our minds get fuzzy. What does 1,000,000 degrees even feel like? What does flattened within a radius really mean when you've never stood in a radius before? What does it mean to destroy a city in a blink? Not in the movies, but on a quiet morning when people were eating breakfast, going to school, buttoning shirts. Our minds recoil not because they're weak, but because they're protective. Because some truths are too vast, too luminous, too sharp-edged to hold directly, and so we flinch inward, not out of cowardice but out of care. And yet, the feeling lingers. Even if we don't understand the math, the science, or the physics, we understand the silence that follows. We feel it in our bones, even if we don't have the words. There's something primal about the nuclear bomb, not just because it's dangerous, lots of things are, but because it breaks the rules we thought were unbreakable. It takes the invisible, the intangible, the molecular, and turns it into thunder. It turns mass, the solidness of a thing, into light and flame and pressure and silence. That idea, that something can vanish and become energy, is magical. It feels like a story from myth, alchemy, a god's trick, a word spoken and the world shakes. And maybe that's why we whisper around it. Because part of us understands, instinctively, that this is power not meant for casual use. It's too large for that. too sacred in its own terrible way, like watching lightning strike and knowing, even from a distance, that it could have been you. You might have noticed that when nuclear weapons are discussed, in films, in politics, in textbooks, the language shifts. It becomes clinical, precision, yield, deterrence, mutually assured destruction, big ideas with tidy names, and yet no number, not kilotons, not megatons, quite captures the feeling of heat on skin that used to be a shadow, of silence in a place where thousands were laughing a moment ago, of the way light can blind you even if your eyes are closed. This too is psychological. We buffer, we sanitize, we step back from the edge and wrap horror in charts so we don't have to look directly at it. Because there's something in the nuclear that asks us not just what science can do, but what humans should do. And those questions don't always sleep well. Even the word itself, nuclear, hums with contradiction. It means energy, progress, modernity. But it also means warning sirens, bunkers, radiation, shadows etched into concrete. It's science and silence, power and absence, a future and the end of it. And what's more unsettling, it's small. A nuclear weapon isn't an ancient dragon or an enormous storm. It's tiny things, atoms, protons, neutrons, rearranged. It's subatomic decisions made inside dense cores, where no one can see. It's science with a whisper, not a roar. Which might be why it feels so uncanny, because in our ordinary lives we don't expect the universe to rearrange itself. We expect a candle to burn from wax. We expect a car to run on gasoline. We expect energy to come with effort. A fire built from wood, a sun born from gravity. But nuclear energy doesn't follow those same scripts. Instead, it breaks a rule so fundamental we barely knew it was a rule. The idea that mass stays mass. And it does this with a kind of eerie elegance. Not an explosion made from gasoline and chaos, but from balanced sheets of energy. From Einstein's quiet equation, E, mc², which tells us, gently, that matter and energy are two faces of the same mystery. So the bomb doesn't explode in the way we imagine explosions. It unfolds, it becomes, it transforms. It doesn't just burn, it converts. And in that conversion, something ancient happens. Light, pressure, heat, silence. And this changes how we feel about the world, even if we don't know the physics, even if we forget the dates or the treaties or the Cold Wars or the hot summers. Somewhere, deep inside, we remember that this exists, that humans built a sun and dropped it, that we opened something we cannot close, and that knowledge lives quietly in us, in the same part of the brain that flinches at cliffs or counts lightning after thunder. Because once you know what atoms can do, you can't unknow it. And maybe that's why nuclear weapons live more in dreams than in diagrams. They haunt the edges of our imagination, not because we don't understand them, but because we do. We understand what it means to be undone by something we made, to build a thing and realize too late that it has outgrown us, that the fire doesn't know who lit it. We understand too the way humans seek control. The bomb, in many ways, is a strange kind of wish. The wish to hold power so great it prevents its own use. The idea that if something is terrifying enough, it will keep us safe by standing quietly in the corner. But that safety, if it is safety, comes with weight. There are people alive today who grew up under that shadow, who learned how to duck under desks in case of a flash, who lived with maps of fallout zones and air raid sirens as lullabies. And even now, in quieter decades, the presence remains, like a locked box in the basement, like a fire alarm with no fire, just waiting. And this waiting, this quiet vigilance, affects how we think. It shapes the stories we tell. It sharpens the edges of nightmares. It adds a layer of tension to headlines that might otherwise be just political. Because when the power exists to destroy everything, every small thing matters more. Every handshake, every speech, every satellite photo. And while most of us live our days without thinking about nuclear weapons, we cook, we drive, we worry about emails, there is still, beneath it all, a background hum. Like a low-frequency sound only part of you hears. It's the feeling of knowing the clock exists even if no one's watching it. But perhaps the strangest psychological truth is this. We're both horrified by the bomb and fascinated by it. Like moths to flame, like children watching a magician. We want to look away, and yet we lean closer. We imagine it, we fictionalize it, we rehearse it. Not because we want it, but because we're trying to understand it, to fit it into our world, to shrink it down to something nameable. Because if we can name a thing, maybe we can hold it. And if we can hold it, maybe it won't slip through our fingers. And so we write about it, we debate it, we dream about it, or through it. Sometimes gently, sometimes not. Because even the softest minds can touch dark questions, if they're given time, if they're allowed to hold the shadow without flinching. And that's why, here, in this quiet space between science and sleep, we talk about these things not to provoke, but to ponder, not to fear, but to feel. Because the story of the nuclear bomb is not just about technology. It's not even just about history. It's about us, our reach, our restraint, our wonder, our warning. It's about how something so small, an atom, a thought, a moment, can change everything. And how even now the quiet ticking in the back of the mind reminds us what we're capable of, not just in destruction, but in awe, and maybe, just maybe, in wisdom. Long before the world split the atom, long before uranium was weighed or neutron cross-sections measured, humanity already knew the shape of unimaginable power. We saw it in lightning, in volcanoes, in wildfire and plague and the sudden rage of the ocean, and we named it gods, spirits, judgment, wrath. Not because we fully understood it, but because we had to. Because to live beside something so vast, so capable of undoing everything required a story, or a symbol. Something to wrap the fear in, like a blanket wrapped around flame. Every culture has a version of this. In Hindu mythology, there is Shiva, the destroyer, yes, but also the transformer, the end of things, but also the beginning. In one sacred text, the Bhagavad Gita, a god reveals his cosmic form, and a prince sees all of time and death unfolding at once. Centuries later, J. Robert Oppenheimer, watching the first nuclear test ignite the desert sky, would recall that verse, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." It wasn't a calculation. It was recognition that what they had built resembled something ancient, something divine, or perhaps demonic, a flame from myth, now real. In Norse legend, there's Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. When fire swallows the earth, the skies are torn and the world is remade from ash. In Christian scripture, Revelation brings trumpets and plagues and flames and final judgment. In Native American traditions, stories speak of cycles, worlds born, destroyed, reborn, not as punishment, but as rhythm, a pulse as old as time itself. In every corner of the world, people have carried this idea, that fire can cleanse or end or transform, that something vast will one day return what was given, and maybe that's why the nuclear bomb feels so familiar, even though it's so new. Because it fits a shape we already feared. It mirrors old anxieties, ancient dreams. It is not just a weapon of science. It's a myth reawakened. Even the way we talk about it carries echoes of story. Mushroom cloud, fallout, ground zero. Each phrase is oddly poetic, like something lifted from prophecy or epic verse. The kind of language that would feel equally at home in a scripture or a saga. And maybe that's not accidental, because when we cannot make sense of something through logic alone, we reach for metaphor, for symbol, for ceremony. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, survivors describe not just the heat and the sound, but the silence that followed. Birds gone, shadows burned into walls, people turning to smoke. There were no words for it, only fragments, images, stillness. In Japan, the word hibakusha emerged. Explosion affected people, not soldiers, not enemies, just people caught in something too large to name, and across oceans people lit candles, or fell silent, or argued. Some cheered, some wept, some pretended nothing had changed, but something had. The age of myth had become mechanical. We had reached into the sky for lightning, and caught it. But the strange thing is, we'd been trying for centuries. The ancient Greeks believed that all matter was made of indivisible building blocks, atoms, though they had no instruments to see them, just thought experiments and wonder. They imagined motion, void, and the dance of particles before the microscope had even been conceived. In medieval alchemy, the dream was transformation, lead into gold, mortality into eternity. Fire was key, always fire, and symbols were drawn of flasks and furnaces and things being purified, released. And later, during the Industrial Revolution, steam and coal and combustion became symbols of progress. Energy meant motion, heat, speed. We built machines, then cities, then empires, all powered by increasingly refined versions of fire. But still we were working with the outer layers of nature. Coal is old wood. Oil is ancient sunlight. Even fire itself is just a reshuffling of chemical bonds. Impressive, yes, but still surface level. The idea that energy could lie within matter itself, locked in the very particles of atoms. That idea belonged to the 20th century, and when it arrived it came not as a gentle whisper, but as an experiment gone critical, as chain reactions and neutron multiplication and suddenly equations that ended in fire. But again, we wrapped it in ritual. The first nuclear test, codenamed Trinity, was scheduled at dawn. Scientists watched from bunkers. Some wore sunglasses, some didn't. Some thought the atmosphere might ignite. Others took bets. And when the bomb went off, silence followed. Not celebration, not triumph, just silence. Not because it hadn't worked, but because it had. And deep in that silence was something very old, a feeling that the world had just shifted in a way it couldn't shift back. Oppenheimer, in recalling the Gita, wasn't trying to be poetic. He was trying to find an anchor in a moment that defied anchoring. Because myth is how we metabolize the unthinkable. In the years that followed, as more bombs were tested, underwater, underground, in the upper atmosphere, new rituals emerged. Warning sirens, fallout shelters, duck and cover drills in schools, survival manuals. These were not just practical responses. They were, in their way, cultural myths. Ways of saying, here is how you survive the end of the world, even if, deep down, we weren't sure anyone could. And in response, art shifted. Films imagined wastelands, books explored mutants, bunkers, post-apocalyptic scavengers. Even comedies, like Dr. Strangelove, found dark humour in absurdity. Because sometimes laughter is the only tool left when awe turns to anxiety. But not every culture reacted with fear. In the Soviet Union, atomic imagery became a symbol of strength, of mastery over nature. Posters showed atoms as flowers, bombs as guardians of peace. In the US, the atomic age was marketed as modernity itself. Atomic toasters, atomic cocktails, atomic optimism. It was as if, by domesticating the symbol, we could make the danger feel less real. And maybe, on some level, that worked. But beneath the branding, the mushroom cloud lingered. A new god in the pantheon, or perhaps an old one, reborn in fission. Even languages absorbed the weight of the bomb. In English, we now say things blew up, even if we mean popularity, not destruction. We talk about nuclear options in business. We use the idea of fallout to describe emotional aftermath. We borrow the terms because we felt them once, or still do. And in that way, the bomb became not just a weapon, but a metaphor for power, for escalation, for the things we unleash that we cannot fully recall. There are also traditions, quieter ones, that tried to answer the bomb not with bigger explosions but with gentleness. In Japan, each August, lanterns are floated down rivers in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, glowing, silent, bearing the names of the dead. It's not protest, not politics, just remembrance. The opposite of flash and fire, a whisper that says, "We were here, we remember, let it never be again." And that too is culture, because history is not just events, it's how those events ripple, how they change rituals, language, imagination, how a single morning can echo for generations. Even now, many decades later, the nuclear shadow remains. We don't speak of it daily, but it's there, in treaties, in silos, in vaults and policies and launch codes, in climate simulations, in stories whispered by grandparents who once saw two suns rise. And even in places where no bomb ever fell, the idea of it changed things. It taught us that no place is truly distant, that power is global, that silence can be deeper than sound. But more than that, it taught us something mythological, that knowledge is not neutral, that to split an atom is not just to understand the universe, it's to change the universe, to tilt it, to rethread the web of meaning. And this is deeply human, because all our greatest powers come with this dual nature. Fire can warm or burn, water can nourish or drown, words can comfort or cut. And so too with the atom, it can light cities or level them. It is not good or evil, it is potential, and we, always, are the ones who decide how that potential is shaped. So yes, the nuclear bomb is destructive, devastatingly so. But it is also a mirror, a reflection of how far we've come and how carefully we must tread. And perhaps that is why cultures across time and space have always returned to the same questions. What do we do with power? Who gets to hold it? And what story do we tell ourselves? When the fire starts speaking back, let's start very small. Smaller than dust, smaller than cells, smaller than anything you've ever held in your hand. Atoms. They are the scaffolding of reality, the quiet architecture behind every leaf, every breath, every stone. For most of human history, we didn't know they were there. We sensed structure, of course, that things could be divided, that matter had layers, but it wasn't until the last century or two that we began to see them, or at least infer them with a kind of trembling certainty. And once we did, the universe opened. Because atoms are not solid spheres, they are mostly space, like little solar systems, with a heavy nucleus at the centre, protons and neutrons huddled tight, and electrons dancing in orbits around them. But if you were to pluck one of those atoms from the air right now, say, a nitrogen atom from your exhale, and you were to look closely, magnified 1 trillion times over, you'd find that the real drama is happening deep inside that nucleus. That's where the energy waits, not in the electrons, not in the outer rings, but in the tight, quiet space where protons and neutrons cling together. Because here's the beautiful, terrifying truth, that nucleus is holding more energy than it seems to have any right to contain. You see, protons are all positively charged, and like charges repel. So in theory, they should be pushing each other apart, but they don't. Why? Because of something called the strong nuclear force, one of the 4 fundamental forces in nature, and the strongest by far. It works only at tiny distances, but within those distances it's powerful enough to glue protons and neutrons together, even when the protons are trying to escape. It's like a cosmic scale game of trust, tension wrapped in balance, and as long as that balance holds, the atom is stable. But if you disrupt it, if you take certain kinds of atoms, like uranium-235 or plutonium-239, and you disturb that delicate nucleus in just the right way, you can cause it to split. This is called fission. And the moment it happens, something extraordinary is released. Imagine dropping a tiny pebble into a still pond. Now imagine the pond explodes. That's the scale of change we're talking about. When the nucleus splits, it throws off more neutrons, and these neutrons go careening into nearby nuclei, which also split and send off more neutrons. And suddenly, like a fire racing across dry grass, you get a chain reaction. Each step releases more energy than the last. Not fire, not flames, but raw, searing energy, in the form of heat, light, and pressure. And here's the part that still feels like science fiction. The total amount of material required for this chain reaction to be devastatingly powerful is tiny. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima used less than 1 kilogram of uranium-235 in its core. Only a fraction of that underwent fission, and yet the energy released was equivalent to about 15,000 tons of TNT. That's the power of E man mc2, Einstein's deceptively simple equation that tells us energy and mass are interchangeable. A little bit of mass, just a whisper of material, can be turned into a storm, because c2, the speed of light squared, is not a small number. It means that even a gram of matter, if fully converted, could produce an explosion large enough to level city blocks. But bombs, of course, are not about elegance. They're about mechanics. And to turn a theory into a weapon, you need a design. There are different ways to trigger a nuclear explosion, but 2 designs became iconic in the early days. The first, used in Hiroshima, is called a gun-type bomb. It works like this. Imagine 2 subcritical pieces of uranium, not quite enough on their own to sustain a chain reaction. But if you fire one into the other, using a small explosive, they combine into a single supercritical mass, and the chain reaction begins. It's surprisingly straightforward. 2 halves, 1 sudden union, and then silence gives way to light. The second design, used 3 days later in Nagasaki, is more complex, the implosion-type bomb. Instead of slamming 2 pieces together, this one uses a core of plutonium surrounded by carefully arranged conventional explosives. When these outer explosives detonate, they compress the plutonium inward, squeezing it into a supercritical state. It's not an explosion outwards, but a crushing inward, forcing the material to a density where the chain reaction can unfold all at once, and unfold it does. In microseconds the reaction begins. In the next millionth of a second, a fireball forms, hotter than the surface of the sun. Temperatures reach tens of millions of degrees. The air itself becomes plasma. The bomb doesn't just explode, it creates a miniature star for a heartbeat here on Earth. But that's only the beginning, because all that energy pushes outward, compressing the air around it into a shock wave. This is the blast, the first and most immediate force of destruction. It travels faster than sound, flattens buildings, breaks glass miles away, turns walls into shrapnel. Then comes the thermal radiation, heat intense enough to ignite fires, melt skin, turn sand into glass, and finally, the ionizing radiation, invisible but deadly. Neutrons and gamma rays that damage living cells, cause radiation sickness, leave long-term effects in bone marrow, DNA and memory, and all of it, in the first seconds. It's this speed that our minds struggle to grasp, that such immense destruction doesn't take minutes or hours or days, but moments. The bomb does not wait, it does not announce, it simply is and then was. And then comes the silence, the vacuum left behind, the quiet that follows the roar, dust rising in strange spirals, ash where people once stood, echoes where there were once voices. In the centre of the blast, temperatures were so high that shadows were burned into stone, the only trace left of those who had been standing there. It's the speed and scale, again, that our brains push back against. Because this is not just an explosion, it is conversion of matter into energy, of theory into reality, of ordinary life into something that cannot be named, and it all begins with a nucleus, with the tiniest balance of forces, with protons held in place by the strong nuclear force and the quiet waiting of a neutron wandering too close. Even the word critical takes on new weight here. In physics, a critical mass is the amount of fissile material needed to sustain a chain reaction. If you have less than that, the reaction fizzles. More than that, and the energy cascades. But critical also means pivotal, irreversible, a moment after which everything is different, and that perhaps is the truest description of a nuclear explosion. It is a critical moment in every sense. 1 second you are in a world you know, with streets and shoes and windows and clocks, and the next, that world is gone, and no one ever really expects it. Even in the desert at the first test in July 1945, the scientists stood in protective shelters but watched with open eyes. Some were afraid the atmosphere would ignite. Others believed the bomb might be a dud. Some hoped, secretly, it wouldn't work. But it did. The sky lit up before the sound arrived. The desert glowed, and in that strange dawn, a new age began. The atomic age, not just of bombs, but of understanding, of reckoning, of knowing for the first time that the universe's deepest forces were not locked away in distant stars, but right here, in our hands, in the dust we breathe, the water we drink, the bones beneath our skin. It's all atoms, it's all energy, and under the right, or wrong, circumstances, it's all potential. That's what makes the nuclear bomb so destructive. Not just the mechanics, not just the heat or the radiation or the blast radius, but the fact that it's a reminder that nature holds powers we barely comprehend, and that sometimes, when we learn to unlock them, we forget to ask if we should. If the blast is the beginning, then what follows is the echo, not in sound, but in matter, because a nuclear bomb doesn't end when the fireball fades. In some ways, that's when it really begins. In the moments after the explosion, as the shockwave rolls outward and the world still trembles, the remnants of the bomb and the city and the soil and the people begin to rise. Carried upward by the heat of the fireball, debris and vaporized material swirl into a towering column. At its peak, it begins to flatten and spread. That strange, unforgettable shape, the mushroom cloud. It isn't just smoke, it's not just dust, it's fused particles of bomb casing and earth and bone and metal, all made radioactive by the explosion, bits of plutonium, fission products like iodine-131, cesium-137, strontium-90, each with their own half-life, their own eerie kind of clock. This is fallout. The word sounds soft, almost accidental, but it's anything but gentle. As the mushroom cloud cools, gravity begins its quiet work. Particles begin to drift downward, sometimes quickly, sometimes over days. They fall on rooftops, on riverbeds, on people's skin, on food, on crops, on the soft fur of animals. And because they're radioactive, they don't simply land, they linger. This is one of the most haunting aspects of nuclear weapons, that they keep working long after they've done their worst, that they continue to reshape bodies, ecosystems, timelines, invisibly. Radiation is not a thing we can see or smell. It doesn't glow green or buzz ominously. It's quiet, persistent, and its effects are subtle at first. A feeling of nausea, a sudden fatigue, a drop in white blood cells. But under the surface, damage is accumulating. Radiation affects living tissue by damaging DNA, the fundamental instruction manual for life. In small doses, the body may repair the damage, but in large or repeated exposures, the repair systems falter. Cells mutate. Some die. Others grow uncontrollably. This is why survivors of nuclear detonations face higher rates of cancers, leukemia, thyroid cancer, lung and bone and breast cancers, not always right away, but years later. A long echo. Children exposed in the womb may be born with deformities or suffer cognitive effects. Entire generations may feel the tremor of a bomb they never heard, and yet the radiation doesn't stop. Because some isotopes remain dangerous for centuries. Cesium-137, for example, has a half-life of about 30 years. That means in 3 decades, half of it decays, but the rest remains. After 60 years, a quarter is still there. After 90, 1/8, and so on, which means that the soil, the water, the bones of a city may carry the signature of the bomb long after its builders are gone. Even plants absorb it. Grains, mushrooms, grasses. Animals eat the plants. People eat the animals. It moves through the food chain like a whisper, invisible but potent. And in places where tests were done, deserts, atolls, open sea, the land still tells the tale. In the Marshall Islands, on Bikini Atoll, where the US conducted dozens of nuclear tests, there are islands so contaminated that resettlement remains dangerous even now. Coconut trees grow, yes, but their fruit carries the memory of fallout. And it's not just external. Fallout has entered the atmosphere too. In the 1950s and 60s, as nations tested bombs in the open air, radioactive particles spread around the globe. Strontium-90 was found in baby teeth in cities far from any test site. Cesium rained down in snowflakes. Even now, traces of that era remain detectable in soils and sediments, in the bones of people born during the Cold War. It's as if the planet itself was briefly tattooed with radiation, a mark that says, this happened. Even the light of the bomb leaves a trace. Flash burns, the thermal radiation released in that first moment, can cause shadows to be permanently etched onto walls, not shadows cast by people but by their absence. Stones scorched around the outline of a body that was there one moment, gone the next. There are photographs of these shadows, on sidewalks, stairwells, bridges, impressions of bicycles, railings, a ladder, human forms mid-motion, paused forever in light. It's a strange kind of fossil, not of bone, but of being. But of course, the damage isn't just physical. Radiation has a psychological weight. There's a particular kind of dread that comes with the unseen, a fear not of explosion but of exposure, of time working against you in quiet, hidden ways, of an enemy that doesn't chase, doesn't roar, just waits. People exposed to fallout often spoke of feeling contaminated, not just biologically but spiritually, as if touched by something unclean, as if the body had betrayed them, or the world had. And sometimes that trauma passed to the next generation. Children of survivors carried stories they couldn't remember, but couldn't forget either. Nightmares of fire, of sirens, of silence, of sky. Even those born far away, years later, felt the edges of the bomb in the drills, the documentaries, the whispers, the quiet tension in their parents' voices when someone said atomic. That's the true complexity of nuclear destruction. It's not just about cities and blast zones, it's about time. Nuclear weapons stretch destruction across time. First the explosion, then the fire, then the radiation, then the silence, then the sickness, then the memory. And that memory lingers, even in science. Because to understand a nuclear bomb is to understand not just fission, the splitting of atoms, but also the systems designed to amplify, deliver and maximize its effects. Modern weapons aren't simple anymore. They involve layers, triggers, reflectors, neutron initiators. Some are boosted, using fusion reactions to increase yield. Others are designed to detonate high above ground to maximize EMP, electromagnetic pulses that can disable electronics. There are thermonuclear weapons too, often called hydrogen bombs, which use a fission bomb to ignite a fusion reaction, like in the sun. These are not just city-destroying, they're continent-wounding. Their power is measured in megaton ranges, millions of tons of TNT. The largest ever detonated, the Tsar bomber, was tested by the Soviet Union in 1961. It released the equivalent of 50 megatons of TNT. Its fireball was visible from hundreds of miles away. Windows shattered more than 500 miles from the blast. The shockwaves circle the globe 3 times, and yet, all of it still comes down to tiny particles moving in precise, merciless steps. That's what makes it so difficult to comprehend. That something built by people, engineered, calculated, assembled, can imitate a star, can echo creation itself, and that in doing so, it can unravel not just cities but certainty. After the first bombs were used, many scientists, those who had helped design them, fell into silence. Some resigned. Others wrote manifestos. They had been chasing knowledge, but they had built a weapon that outpaced knowledge. That questioned what progress meant, and that question still echoes. Because the science behind a nuclear bomb is not dark. It is beautiful in a way, balanced, precise. The dance of forces, the poetry of mass and energy, the elegance of conversion. It is the use that casts the shadow. The science does what it does. Neutrons don't vote. Plutonium doesn't dream of war. It is we who shape it, who decide whether atoms light cities or level them. And so we return, again and again, to the same quiet wonder. How can something so small do so much?